In this video, I'm going to be talking a bit about this render and a few of the things that I did to create this render. So this render was created using Arborea, and I actually was using this as a test render for my new cliff and rock assets. So you can see all of the cliff and rocky assets, like the ground rock assets and all of these stones, the cliffs, all of those are now included in the new update for Arborea. And this render was just to test them out, see how they looked, and see if I needed to make any final adjustments. So in this video, I'm going to talk a bit about how I set up this foreground with these rock assets, kind of a bit about how I set up the castle and kind of my strategy for setting up castles in general, and then also like the lighting and just kind of like the scene setup in general. All right, so this is what the scene actually looks like in rendered view. So without any of the post-processing, here's the final, here is the raw render. And this is what the scene looks like in the viewport. So it's a pretty big scene, not giant, but it is pretty spread out. Let me go into the foreground right here. So I think for the start of the video, I'm going to talk a bit about kind of how I set up the foreground. So as you can see in here in the foreground, I didn't use like a ground plane or anything like I usually do. The foreground is just a bunch of these rock pieces, and they're just kind of kit bashed around. It's the same, it's actually the same rock asset, just kind of scaled up, rotated, squished down, just kind of placed in random places to create this terrain. And this is one of the things that I really like about this new asset is this is just one single asset right here, but you're able to like rotate it around and combine it in a bunch of different ways to just kind of make more rock structures and just like an entire kind of foreground like this. So I can actually go into a new file and kind of show you my strategy for doing something like this, creating something kind of similar to how I did here, but more of like a quick version, of course. Okay, so here I am in a blank blend file, just empty right now, and I'm just going to show you kind of my strategy for setting up something like I did with the foreground in the final render. So I'm just bringing in a plane right now, and I'm just going to extrude this down into a kind of like squished cube. I'm going to select everything, go Shift N, and Shift N is just going to recalculate the normals to make sure the water displays correctly on all sides of the faces. And then I'm going to just bring in my water material. This isn't a tutorial on how I create my water shaders. I have multiple tutorials covering water and stuff like that on my website. But yeah, let me just adjust the material. I'm just going to make it a little bit more of a light blue color. All right, and there's nothing underneath it right now, so it looks pretty fake, and it's just reflecting the sky and also showing the HDRI underneath here. But it will look better once I actually get the cliff rock assets underneath this. So I'm going to go into here now, and let's just go into rocks. So in here, I'm just going to bring in the riverbed formation. So we have this, and I guess the water is actually kind of small. So I'm going to go S, Shift Z to scale everything like this. And then maybe actually bring down this face a little bit more so we have some room to work with. There you go. All right, so this is what the asset looks like on its own. And basically what I did to set up the foreground was I just grabbed this, do Alt D to create an instance of this, and I'll just like move it around, maybe create like new sections like this, or you can just kind of like rotate it, move it down or up, scale it up or down if you need, something like this. Alt D one more time. And then just kind of fill in these blanks like this. So as you can see right now, like wherever there's kind of like a gap or something like that, you can just kind of maybe pull this down a little bit more or rotate it a little bit to kind of merge in there. And I like mixing this with water because, well, this is like a river rock, but it just looks really good being halfway underwater and halfway above water. So using it for these types of scenes, I find to work the best. And we'll do something like maybe this. So this one I tilted, and I like doing this a lot too. Another thing you can do as well is then you can also S and then Z to scale it down on the Z axis and kind of flatten this. And then I'll use this for kind of like, like the ground or whatever, something like that, or just sections where I need to kind of like flatten areas, like something like that. And then if you need something taller, you can go S, Z, and then, don't go too high or else it's going to be really stretched. But it doesn't look terrible if you just kind of bring it up like this a little bit, give it some extra height, and then you can just kind of build off of that as well. So like right here, maybe I'll like create another step up this way. And if you want to, you can also duplicate this, and then you can go SX -1 to flip it as well. So it's mirrored. And then you can just completely use the mirrored version for a new cliff wall section like this. So I got this little hill right here. I might kind of squish this part down a little bit, maybe tilt it down a little bit to give it a bit more of like an incline and angle. And you can see already right here, we have this kind of like cliff rock section. If I go into my camera and kind of like fly over here, this is already kind of a cool composition we're getting right here, or not really a composition, but just kind of like base scene setup. So we got something like that. And then you can just kind of, once you find a camera position, which this isn't a great camera position, but like once you find something you like, you can just kind of like look through camera view like this. Maybe scale this down a little bit, move this closer to the camera, like over here. Maybe I'll scale this one on the Z-axis, kind of flatten it out so we have more of like a ground right here. And then G, X. Yeah, so this is essentially how I used this to create the foreground. It's really easy to create something really cool with this because it just blends together really well, and there's a lot of really cool details. So yeah, just remember you don't actually have to use the default scale like this. While this does look good, it does look great too if you scale it down like this and use a more flattened version, which as you can see right here, even for like something closer to the camera, this would still look pretty cool. And then also the more taller versions like this, and just combining these together. And then, yeah, of course, also do stuff like SX-1 to flip it so we can get some more variation like this. Move this around, create some like steps. There we go. And then just kind of keep moving this down like that. Yeah, so there's lots of different things you can do with this, and this is essentially how I built out my foreground. So pretty quick, pretty easy, and I feel like there's a lot of variety with this. And I also want to get a lot more of these types of assets too, just for like, I don't know, like some like ground rock variations like this, because these are really fun to use. So I'm going to try to get as many of these types of rocks in Arborea as I can in future updates. So also, if you have any recommendations for stuff like that that you'd like, definitely let me know. All right, so now I'm going to talk about how I scattered the moss and greenery on these rocks as well, which is really easy to do with Arborea. So basically, let's just select, yeah, we'll do this one right here. So this one's close to the camera. So I'm just going to select one of the main rock assets. So this one right here. And I'm going to actually rename this real fast just so it's easy to differentiate between all of the other assets that basically have the same name. And we go emitter. Oh, oops, I have caps lock on. Oh well. So we have this. And I'm going to also apply rotation and scale just because I scaled this one up by 1.2 just to make sure the scale of the scatter system is correct as well. So we have this, and now we have to just set this rock asset as the emitter. So you can either use the eyedropper and then select the object here to set it as the emitter, or you can select it, go Alt-Q, bring up the quick add menu and click set as emitter as well. That does the exact same thing. Okay, I'm going to go into the asset browser and let's bring in the Irish moss flowering. So this is one of my favorite mosses to use. It looks really cool. I just love like white flowers on greenery. I just think that's like a really, really cool look. So to scatter in Arborea, it's really quick and easy. You can just click scatter asset from the pop-up right here. This will automatically create a scatter system on your emitter. And let's just increase the density a bit. And by default, the size is kind of small. I mean, it's moss, so it's supposed to be kind of small, but I do want to make this a little bit bigger just so it takes up a bit more space and it kind of gets this more like fluffy look, which is really cool, I think. Maybe 1.75. How about that? We'll go into the rotation, do something like maybe 8 just to give it a little bit more randomization, maybe 12. And then distribution, let's do like 25. Or let's actually do like 75. We'll crank it up a lot, but then use pattern, crunch this in, increase the noise scale, and then we can get these like really cool patterns this way and just get some nice variation. So it kind of just grows in patches like this. So I think that looks pretty cool. Another thing I want to do as well is make sure that I only scatter on certain slopes. So as you can see right here, it's scattering on every section like this and also on the bottom side, which I guess you can't see because there's other rocks underneath here. But I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to click slope right here, and then I can actually control the maximum slope that this scatters on. So if I actually want to just scatter within 10 degrees, everything that's more than 10 degrees won't scatter. So let's just crank this up a little bit more, maybe like 45. That looks pretty good. And now that we have this, we got to transfer the system to every other asset as well, which is really easy to do. I'm just going to select all of these assets and then this one as well. So we have that. And I just selected everything except for the emitter that we already have. And then there's two ways we can set multi-emitters. There's this multi-emitter section right here. And then you can also go Alt-Q, add as multi-emitter as well in the quick add menu, which this is what I usually do because it's quicker. So as you see when I did that, it actually added that system to every other asset that was selected. And the nice thing about this is these aren't separate systems. These are actually all connected within this same system here, as you can see. So you can actually remove them if you want in here, you can view them, and any change that I make, like if I set the system as display as bounds to speed up the viewport, it does that for every single asset. And then if I go in here, change the noise size, it updates in here. If I change the seed, it updates in here as well. And now if you look in the camera view, the moss is showing on all of these assets. Some of them don't display correctly. I think the ones that I flipped don't display correctly. Let me go into edit mode right here. I'll go Shift N, recalculate the normals. Oh, there you go. So on the assets that I scaled by -1 to flip, that also messes with the normals so that they're facing the other way. So if something's scattering on the inside of the faces, just recalculate the normals, flip them, and it should all display correctly. But as you can see right here, now we have our system on all of these assets. Whatever changes you make, we'll update here. And basically another thing that I did to just kind of limit the amount of particles that I was using, you can see 80K right here, which is quite a bit. I also used elevation, and I limited the elevation up to the water basically. So under the minimum, you can see there's moss underneath the water here. If I start cranking this up a bit, you're going to see that moss actually disappears. Let's do like 0.5, or let's try like 0.4. Okay, let's try 0.45. There you go. So now you can see everything that's below water gets cut off, which actually was quite a bit. Now there's only 20,000. And then another thing I can do as well is go in here, turn on camera culling, and then now whatever's within the camera view will show, and then whatever's outside of camera view doesn't show. So yeah, very easy. This is basically how I set up my foreground. Obviously it doesn't look the exact same. I didn't want to do the exact same foreground. I just wanted to kind of show you kind of how I set up something similar. But yeah, there is that. And for the castle, as you can see right here, this is what the castle looks like in the viewport. And I think for this, I'm going to actually just go through my process video and just show you the time lapse of me creating this castle and setting this up, and just kind of narrate over that and just talk about what I was doing throughout this process, as that will probably be the easiest way to go about showing you guys exactly how this castle was set up. So basically I just started with one of my main towers in the Gothic asset pack. I placed that in the center of the scene, pretty far off in the distance. I put it centered with the composition and also at the height where I wanted the top of the castle to be. And then after that, I just brought in one of the steep roofed kind of house models that I have in there. And I just placed that alongside the kind of like upper section of the tower, just so we have these kind of like roof slants, which is something I like to do on a lot of my castles. I think it looks really cool. And then I just basically rotated that 90 degrees, pulled that out a little bit, and then kind of made this kind of like intersection between those two roofs, which I thought looked really cool. And then after that, I just placed the 3D cursor in the center of my tower, which allowed me to actually set the transform pivot point to 3D cursor. And then I can actually just rotate those models around that tower equally to create symmetry. I then just brought in the bridge model. I'm just doing some quick cube projection and material swapping just so it basically fits the rest of the models more cleanly. And then I'm going in with my array modifier and just basically duplicating that until it just extends off the screen. After that, I just brought in one of the bigger like building models, and I'm just scaling that down and placing that on the side in front of the other kind of like steep roofed models. And I just shrunk it down quite a bit and also used the transform pivot point to rotate it on the other side. One of the main things I like to do with castles is just make sure I kind of follow symmetry. So if I do it on one side, I'll also do it on the other side, and sometimes I'll do it on all four sides as well. I think using symmetry generally looks really cool when doing castles, and it generally is pretty easy to create some really cool patterns and looks with your castles and towers when you do stuff like that. I did, of course, have the bridge coming out of the left side of the castle, so I was only kind of doing symmetry on three sides, and then the front face is going to be built a little bit differently, so that's why I'm trying to figure out kind of how to place those other assets around to create kind of like a cool and interesting front section. So I just duplicated the like the shorter kind of like less steep roofed version of that house model or that building model and placed that alongside the front. And after that, I decided it'd be nice to create kind of a base for the castle and just like a wall to surround it so you know, you don't have like a floating castle. So to create this cylindrical kind of look that I had in here, I brought in a circle curve, placed that in the center of my castle, scaled it up to the size I want the wall to be. And then I place the wall in the center point of that circle. And then I just turn on my array modifier, and then I add a curve modifier as well, and then set that curve object to be that curve circle. And before I do anything else, I'm also adding some subdivisions. So once it curves, it actually curves smoothly and isn't all jagged. Then I just increase the array count, and that just basically fills out the rest of that circle shape. So after that, it's just basically parenting the curve and the wall together so they move together, and then figuring out like the scale of the wall, the placement of the wall, and just basically how I want to have this castle sitting on this cylindrical base. I decided to move it down a little bit more to give some room for some more buildings underneath there, and then duplicate it, scale it down a bit, and actually create a second kind of wall base for the front side of the castle. So I'm just scaling that up and positioning that into place kind of where I find fits best. And then I decided it'd be nice to use some of my new cliffs to kind of just act as a base for all of that. So it's kind of like a mountaintop castle now. So I'm just kind of bringing in some of my cliff models, duplicating them around, rotating them, scaling them, and just trying to kind of merge them together so that they kind of blend together smoothly and look about as natural as I can. So for the most part, I'm using the same kind of cliff, the Forest Cliff 01. It's one of the bigger models, and I think this one fit really well for the scenes. So I'm just kind of like rotating it in at like an incline facing towards the wall, so it just kind of blends in pretty smoothly. And then after that, I decided to start kind of messing around with some more of the buildings and just duplicating them around and trying to figure out more of that front section since there's a lot of empty space since I brought the wall down a little bit lower than the bridge. So I just duplicated that big model and I'm just kind of rotating that around and decided putting it at like a 45-degree angle would be really cool. So I'm just trying to figure out the height. And then I'm just using the 3D cursor transform pivot point to put that on all four sides equally and create symmetry so it looks equal and even. And the last thing I was doing for this castle was I just brought in one of these really tall wall pieces. And same thing, I'm just using the 3D cursor transform pivot point so that I can kind of rotate these around equally on all four corners and just fill in some of that empty space. And yeah, if you want this asset pack for the castle, you can get all of these assets on my website membership or buy it in my store as well. So it's available in both those places. Okay, now let's talk about the lighting. So here is the lighting in the final render. So let me bring that up. And then, of course, it looks pretty similar in the raw render, just not as bright and saturated. Let me pull this up real fast so we can see more of the window. And then I'm gonna zoom out and just kind of show you everything in here. So I have the sky texture node as the main lighting. I have this image as the background. And then this right here to block light and create shadow, kind of like clouds essentially, but more of a like cheaper version of that, just, you know, using less memory than, you know, actual volumetrics. And then next to the camera, let me actually select the camera and come over here. I have this cube blocking the backlight just so we get this kind of darker foreground area and this kind of like somewhat vignetted look where it kind of darkens the corners a bit more. And yeah, let me just turn all of these off one by one. And then also the volumetrics, how about that? Because that does also affect light too. So we have that. And then let's also disable all of this. There you go. So starting with just the sky texture, this is just the main lighting of the project. So as you can see right here, this is the default sky texture with, well, I think the settings are very close to default except for, of course, the rotation and elevation. So sky texture. So this is the default one right here. I guess the sun size is slightly smaller on mine, but I also cranked down the sun intensity. I put it at 0.55. I also put the background strength to 0.2 because if you have this at 1, it's just super bright by default. So I'll generally bring this down to 0.05 to maybe 0.2 if I want it really bright. And then I'll also bring down the sun intensity a bit as well. Just usually the default value is super strong and don't really like using it that strong unless I'm like in a very like enclosed environment or something. So sun elevation, this is the height of the sun. So you can see the higher I go, the more kind of like midday it becomes. And then the lower it is, the more kind of like sunset and evening type look that you get. And then if you also go below, it becomes night. And then sun rotation, of course, is the rotation of the sun. So you can get the different kind of lighting effects this way. And what I was going for in this scene was some side lighting coming from the left side. I didn't want to go from the right side because they like the bridge and the castle was facing the left. So I wanted to basically highlight all of that detail on the left side that was kind of facing the camera anyways. Yeah, so for the lighting, I really just wanted to basically just highlight this entire section right here and make sure the bridge got lighting too as well. So yeah, the sun texture is really easy to use. It's pretty self-explanatory. The elevation, rotation, altitude. If I put this at 0, you're going to see it actually changes like the color and the atmosphere of the lighting. So I'll change this quite a bit as well. So default is a little bit warmer, a bit more faded in the background, it looks like. If I bring it back up to 24,000, the background becomes a bit more blue. Things become a little bit more contrasted. If I bring it up to like 50,000, 50,000 is around where I use for like night scenes. But for night scenes, I'll also turn down the sun intensity, as you can see. So it becomes like this very nice kind of blue backlighting and like ambient lighting. So yeah, altitude is really fun to mess with. It just gets darker blue the higher you go up with this, as you can see. 24,000 to 0 is usually a good general range for daytime scenes or evening scenes like this, I find. Air, kind of a similar thing. It just kind of like contrasts the scene a little bit more, takes away some of that blue saturation and darkens it a bit. But in here, I wanted to make it 1. I brought up ozone because ozone makes the scene a little bit more blue. If I bring this to 1, well, you can't really see too much, but if I bring this up to a higher value, you can see the lighting just becomes a lot more blue. So I use 1.5 just to kind of bring in a little bit of that blue tint. And then sun size, this is basically default, but this is like, if you want like sharper shadows, go to a lower size. If you want more like overcast lighting and very smooth shadows, as you can see right here, if I make it super high like this, there's not really any lines in the shadows. It just kind of fades off like it's an overcast day kind of, compared to 0.5, where you can actually see that hard cut between light and dark. And then yeah, of course, sun intensity is just how intense that sunlight is. So relatively low here. The color, so what I was doing here was just making the lighting a lot more orange, which right here doesn't really look great, but when you bring in the volumetrics and other aspects I had in the scene, it makes the color look a lot better. But I set this mix color node to color right here, and it just adds that color on top of the HDRI. And I do this quite a bit for my lighting. I find it helps pretty well. I generally don't go higher than 0.3. I think my average is like between 0.2, 0.25. That's my general range for that. And it usually works pretty well. And then the volumetrics, if I bring this in, now you can see this is what creates that depth and fades out the environment to make it look like it's actually farther away, like it would in real life. And I made it pretty dense for this scene just because I wanted it to be a little bit more like hazy kind of feeling, and also have some like nice volumetrics too. So if I select the volume settings here, pretty simple, just the basic volume there, pure white for the color, a very, very low density. There's not really a set range for this. This is just very dependent on how large the cube that you use for the volume is. So the bigger the cube, the lower the density most likely you'll use. But if it's a very small cube, you can probably get away with a higher density because it has to kind of fill that smaller area with more volume basically. And then anistropy. So anistropy for kind of like sunset scenes like this, I'll generally go 0.75, sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little bit lower, but around this range is really good for this type of lighting. If I just go to 0, the default value, you can see it just evens out the fog a lot more, and it works for a lot of scenes, but these types of scenes, it just doesn't really look right, I feel like. 0.75, it just kind of, it makes the volume a little bit less dense looking on the sections where the light isn't coming from. And then the areas the light is shining on and coming from, like this area right here where the light's shining through, it just kind of makes the volume a little bit more dense there, and also kind of helps with like light rays and giving it a little bit more of a bloom look. And yeah, basically all this is just a cube surrounding my scene. I said it displays bounds, so it's not like interfering with my viewport. And inside of here, it's just the volume scatter in volume. So it's a very basic setup. And then I have a second one right here, which is adding volumetrics at the bottom of my scene down here. It's basically just creating clouds only up into this section, kind of just fading down here and kind of creating more of a transition, kind of separation from the foreground and the middle ground. And setup is essentially the exact same. It's the exact same volume. It's just that I added these nodes here. So a noise texture. Yeah, so let me actually solo this out real fast. So noise texture, this just creates a noise pattern. So where it's darker, it's going to show less volume. Where it's brighter white, it's going to show more dense volume. The color ramp basically just adjusts the fall off. So you can see right here, now the darker values are, well, taking up more space and darker. The wider values are more kind of crunched in and smaller. Multiply, this just basically multiplies the value. So this is basically what's controlling the strength of the density. And then let me plug this back into density, take that off. And then you can see, yeah, if I want to make the volume more dense, I just increase the multiply. If I want to make it less dense, I decrease the multiply. So very basic. Just wanted to kind of create broken up volume just so it looked a little bit more broken up and varied, I guess. All right, so we have that. And as you can see, they broken up volume, like the cloudy kind of volume we created here versus just the normal volume. It doesn't look nearly as good. It just kind of blends in with the rest. But with the noise texture, it kind of breaks it up a bit more and actually looks like there's some sort of like mist or something coming from down below or clouds. Okay, the spotlight. This is not really doing too much. As you can see right here on the character, there's some highlight on the bottom of the character, but I really wanted the character to also be a point of interest. So that is why I brought in the spotlight, which you can see brightens up the highlights on the character and then also brings in some more highlights along this edge right here. And the way I did this was super easy. Let me zoom in right here. I have this spotlight. Here are the settings, pretty bright. It's very narrow, so the spotlight size is essentially only taking up the area that my character is in. So it's only really shining on this area and then maybe a little bit back here, but it's not really actually noticeable. A pretty soft fall off size. The radius is the same just because it's a pretty basic light. I didn't really need to do much. I'm using a black body texture, so you can see black body going into the color, which allows me to basically just control the color temperature. So you can see right here, it's changing the color temperature of the lighting. I just matched this color, the color temperature with a similar color to what my sky is. And yeah, so very basic. I used an empty though. So as you can see right here, whenever I move the empty, it actually moves the direction of the lighting. So I put an empty in the center of my character. And then in my spotlight, I went to object constraints. I brought in a track 2 and then set the target to be empty. So now no matter where this light is, it's always facing and pointing at that empty. And the reason I used an empty instead of just tracking it to the character was it will just give me more flexibility on like the height and location of the empty basically. So, you know, if I wanted the light to point in a lower section of the person or a higher section of the person, I could, you know, adjust that and also adjust the character freely without messing with the light location or where the light was facing. Okay, and then the sky. So this is really basic as well and uses a similar tracking method. So as you can see right here, this sky is just kind of like a sunset lighting. And in the object constraints, I'm using that track 2. So track 2, then I'm using the camera. So my camera as the target. So you can see no matter where I move this, it's always directed towards the camera, which makes it really easy to position. As you can see right here, if I need to make any adjustments, if I need to like pull this up or something, I can just do that and it's always directed towards the camera and just makes adjusting this really easy. If I need to scale this up and do whatever, it's always going to work. Another thing too, so my lighting is coming from the left side of the scene and also the lighting on the sky texture or the sky image is coming from the left side of the scene. But if the lighting was coming from the right side of my scene, what I'd want to do is make sure that I use -Z, which flips the image, and it's going to make the lighting come from the right side on this texture. So you just want to make sure whatever sky image you're using also matches the correct lighting. And the shader setup for this is really basic as well. Basically, I have the base color set to black. By default, if it's white, it's going to get faded like this. So make sure if you're using an emission texture, just make sure the base color is set to black or the image itself. Then I have the color going into the color of the emission. It's 1.3, so it's a little bit brighter than default. And then this RGB curves just to kind of add a little bit of contrast. So you can see default is a little bit more faded. Here, I just brought down the blacks a little bit and then brought up the highlights a little bit more as well, just to contrast it a bit more and make it kind of fit the lighting of the scene more nicely. So this light cube, this is what I use in basically every single scene that I make. It's a light blocking cube. So if I take this out, you can see the foreground is just a lot more faded, not nearly as dark, and it kind of flattens out the image, I feel like. It doesn't look terrible, it's just that there's not as much depth as when I have this right here. So I've talked about this a lot before. It's just a cube with the front face taken out. And the camera is placed inside of this dark kind of cave. And as you can see, what it's doing right here is it's just blocking all of the backlight, and it's also absorbing any of the light coming inside of here. So if I were to make this cube pure white, the scene's going to get a little bit brighter in the foreground, because now all of the light that's coming into here is bouncing right back into the foreground again, because the lighter the value is, the more light that will bounce off of it. Then the darker the value is, the less light will bounce, and the more it will just absorb light. So yeah, dark values absorb light, bright values bounce light. So yeah, as you can see right here, it just kind of fades into darkness, which you can see right here, same thing. It's bright and then kind of slowly just fades into this darker kind of framing. And yeah, the size of this just kind of depends on how much light you want to basically block. I try not to make it too visible. This is honestly more than I usually use, but I did want to make a very contrasted kind of like sunset orange kind of scene. So I felt like this looked really good. All right, and then the last part of the lighting is the clouds. So I feel like this right here really helped with that kind of like contrast. So you can see on the castle, the shadows just look so much more like cinematic, and I don't know, it just kind of gives that moody look that I was really looking for. And this is really basic. The setup for this is super basic. It's just a noise texture and color ramp, which you can see right here. Nothing has changed outside of the alpha. So it's just a noise texture, just like before, and then a color ramp just crunching in those white and black values. And of course, wherever it's white is fully opaque, where it's black is going to be transparent and allowing, light to go through. So if I view this again, you can see right here, this is just kind of acting as clouds. And the really nice thing about this is just going to allow you to control like the lighting of your scene very like procedurally. So if I just move this value, you can see this is kind of like the seed for the lighting. And you can just mess around with these values and just get completely different lighting in your scene. Like something like this right here, where like the foreground's kind of darker and like the castle's lit up. This is also kind of like a really cool look too. But I, in the end, went for something like this, where this section was still brighter because I wanted to show off a lot of these rocks, because these assets are new for the add-on, and I just really wanted to make sure I could see all of the assets that are now included and just really see what they all looked like and make sure they looked how I liked in the final render. But yeah, using a plane with a noise texture in the alpha is really nice for just getting some like randomized lighting like this, and just being able to kind of just mess with like a seed slider to get the lighting. It can be kind of tough at times just because it's procedural, so you might spend a while changing this slider over and over again until you find something that you like, but it can be really powerful sometimes. So yeah. All right, so that was really all I wanted to talk about in this video. Yeah, and as I mentioned, everything in this scene is created using Arborea. A bunch of these cliffs, well, actually all of these cliffs and rocks are now included in the new updates. So you can see right here, all of these cliffs that I've been using and those like rocky ground assets, those are all included in the new update. So all of these and the bigger cliffs as well. So yeah, you can get that on Superhive. If you have any questions, let me know. And yeah, hopefully that helped, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.